They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply teaching someone the value of what they've been taking for granted. Let me tell you about the Thanksgiving that changed everything. My name is Eleanor Vance. And at 68, I thought I had seen enough of life's surprises. I was wrong. After 43 years as an emergency room physician, I believed I understood human nature in all its messy, complicated glory. I had dealt with every kind of crisis, saved countless lives, and witnessed both the best and worst of humanity. What I hadn't expected was that my greatest challenge would come not from a medical emergency, but from my own family. The trouble had been brewing for years, though I was too devoted to notice the warning signs. My son-in-law, Rick Sterling, had always been ambitious. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into arrogance. At 40, he had just been promoted to chief executive officer of a tech company, and the title had inflated his ego beyond recognition. He began treating everyone around him as stepping stones to his greater destiny, including my daughter Chloe and me. Chloe, my 38-year-old baby, had once been fierce and independent. She had graduated summa cum laude with a marketing degree and landed a promising position at a prestigious firm. But Rick had convinced her that success meant being the wife of a successful man, not being successful herself. She left her career to become a full-time mother to Leo and Maya, ages 10 and 8 respectively. I watched my brilliant daughter dim her own light to let Rick shine brighter. Over the past 10 years, I had quietly supported their lifestyle in ways that even I hadn't fully calculated until later. When they needed help with the down payment on their sprawling colonial home, I wrote the check without hesitation. When Rick wanted the latest Mercedes and Chloe needed a reliable Lexus for the children, I made it happen. Private school tuition for my grandchildren, membership at the exclusive Crestview Country Club, lavish vacations to Europe and Aspen, all of it funded by the inheritance my late husband Arthur had left me. Arthur had been a successful investment banker, and his careful planning meant I would never want for anything. More importantly, it meant I could help my family without compromising my own security. At least, that's what I told myself, as the checks grew larger and more frequent. Looking back, I realize I was buying something I thought I could purchase. My place in their lives, their respect, their love. Rick had grown accustomed to this support in the way one becomes accustomed to breathing. It was so natural, so expected, that it became invisible to him. He began to speak about their achievements as if they were entirely his own doing. The house, the cars, the children's education, even their social status at the country club. All of it was evidence of his brilliance and hard work. The first real crack in my facade came about 6 months before that fateful Thanksgiving. I was having lunch with Chloe at our usual spot, a quiet bistro downtown, where we used to discuss everything from books to dreams. She seemed distracted, almost nervous, as she picked at her salad. Finally, she looked up at me with those beautiful green eyes that matched my own, and said something that made my blood freeze. "Mom, Rick thinks it might be time for you to consider moving to a retirement community. Nothing dramatic, just something where you'd have more structure, more people your own age." I set down my fork carefully, the way I used to set down surgical instruments when I needed a moment to think. "Structure," I repeated. At 67, with a mind as sharp as ever and a body that still took me on 5-mile walks every morning, I apparently needed structure. Chloe rushed to explain, "It's just that you're living alone in that big house, and Rick worries about your safety. What if something happened and no one found you for days? And honestly, Mom, some of the things you say at dinner parties." "What things?" I asked, though I already knew. Rick had been embarrassed the previous month when I corrected a factual error he made about cardiac procedures at a gathering of his colleagues. I hadn't meant to humiliate him, but accuracy had always been important to me. In the ER, being wrong could mean someone died. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. "You know Rick doesn't like being challenged in front of his business associates. It makes him look bad. And sometimes, your stories about the hospital are a bit intense for some people." I nodded slowly, understanding finally beginning to dawn. My experiences saving lives were too intense for Rick's comfort. My knowledge was threatening to his authority. My very presence in their lives was becoming an inconvenience he wanted to manage by shipping me off to what he euphemistically called a structured environment. I didn't argue that day. Instead, I went home to the house Arthur and I had built together and sat in his old leather chair in the study. That night, I began keeping track of something I had never bothered to monitor before. Exactly how much of my money was flowing into Rick and Chloe's life. The numbers were staggering. In 10 years, I had contributed over $1.5 million to their lifestyle. Not loans, not investments, but gifts. The house payments when Rick's startup struggled, the car payments, the school tuition, the country club fees that Rick claimed were essential for networking, the European vacations that Chloe posted about on social media as evidence of their success. Every dollar had been given freely, lovingly, with no expectation of return except perhaps gratitude and respect. Instead, I had purchased my son-in-law's growing conviction that I was a problem to be managed. The months leading up to Thanksgiving were filled with small humiliations that I began to notice for the first time. Rick would cut me off mid-sentence when I was telling the children stories about their grandfather. He would roll his eyes when I mentioned my work at the hospital, as if 43 years of medical practice were some quaint hobby I had once enjoyed. He would make jokes about old people who couldn't understand technology, always looking at me when he delivered the punchline. Chloe would laugh along, desperate to maintain harmony in her marriage. The children would look confused, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. And I would smile politely, the way I had been trained to do as a woman of my generation, keeping the peace at the expense of my own dignity. The final insult came in the form of an invitation, or rather, the lack of one. Rick was planning a celebration party at the country club for the Sunday after Thanksgiving to commemorate his promotion. When I asked Chloe about it, she looked away and mumbled something about it being a small affair. Just close friends and business associates. I realized then that I had been quietly erased from their public life. The woman who had made their membership at Crestview possible wasn't important enough to attend Rick's moment of triumph. I was becoming what he had always seen me as, a checkbook with an inconvenient personality attached. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold, with the threat of snow in the forecast. I drove to their house in my practical Honda, carrying a bottle of expensive wine that I had chosen specifically for the occasion. Not because I thought they would appreciate it, but because I knew Rick would recognize its value and be forced to acknowledge the gesture. Their house looked perfect from the outside, like something from a magazine spread about successful families. The autumn decorations were professionally arranged, the lawn immaculately maintained by a service I paid for. Rick met me at the door, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Eleanor," he said, using the tone he might employ with an elderly aunt he was obligated to tolerate. Come in, come in. We were just discussing the promotion." The dining room was set with the china that had been my wedding gift to them, candles flickering in the silver holders that had belonged to my mother. Leo and Maya ran to hug me, and for a moment, I felt the pure joy I always experienced with my grandchildren. They didn't care about promotions or country clubs or retirement communities. They just wanted to show me the turkey drawings they had made at school. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Chloe had outdone herself with the meal, and I complimented her on everything from the perfectly browned turkey to the creative cranberry sauce. Rick held court at the head of the table, regaling us with stories about his business acumen and the challenges of leadership. I listened quietly, as I had learned to do, until he decided to propose a toast. He stood up, wine glass in hand, his face flushed with alcohol and self-satisfaction. "Here's to new beginnings," he announced. "To moving forward and leaving behind the things that no longer serve us." His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something in them that I had been trying to ignore for months. Not just disrespect, but active dislike. In that moment, I understood that Rick didn't just want me out of their daily life. He wanted me gone entirely. "Of course," he continued, gesturing expansively, "we're grateful for those who came before us, but times have changed. Today, victory belongs to people with strategic thinking, not to those who just follow orders in some chaotic emergency room. The words hit me like a physical blow. In one sentence, he had dismissed my entire career, reducing 4 decades of saving lives to following orders in chaos. Chloe made a small sound of protest, but Rick was just getting started. "That's the past, sweetheart," he said to his wife, waving her objection away like an annoying insect. "Now we need to build an empire. It's time this family stood on its own 2 feet and eliminated unnecessary burdens." Unnecessary burdens. The phrase echoed in my head as I stared at this man I had supported for 10 years, who was now reducing me to a burden that needed to be eliminated. Around the table, everyone had gone silent. The children looked frightened by the tension they could feel but couldn't understand. I placed my napkin beside my plate with deliberate care, the same precision I had once used when preparing for surgery. The sound of my wine glass touching the table seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "Congratulations on your promotion, Rick," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You're going to need it." I stood up slowly, kissed Leo and Maya on their foreheads, and thanked Chloe for the meal. Then I walked out of that house and drove home through the gathering darkness, leaving behind a family dinner that had just exploded into a war zone. The next morning was Black Friday, and I spent it making the most important purchases of my life. Not buying anything, but buying my freedom by stopping the flow of money that had been sustaining their illusions. I called my lawyer David Chen first. David had been Arthur's best friend and my most trusted advisor for over 20 years. When I explained what had happened at dinner, his response was swift and certain. "Eleanor," he said, "every penny you've given them has been a gift. There are no legal obligations here. No contracts or agreements. You can stop anytime you choose." We spent the morning going through financial records, and David helped me understand the full scope of my generosity. The house payments alone totaled over $300,000. The cars, the tuition, the country club membership that was actually in my name because Rick hadn't qualified on his own, the family vacations that I had funded but rarely attended. All of it added up to a staggering display of my love and their entitlement. My first call was to Wells Fargo, canceling the automatic payment that covered their monthly mortgage. The customer service representative was concerned that this might be a mistake, given the size of the payment and the length of time the arrangement had been in place. I assured her it was quite intentional. The next call went to the Mercedes dealership, ending the lease payments on Rick's car. Then the Lexus dealership for Chloe's vehicle. After that, I contacted Northgate Academy, the private school where Leo and Maya were enrolled, and informed them that I would no longer be responsible for tuition payments. The final call was the most satisfying. I contacted the Crestview Country Club and canceled the family membership that had been in my name since Rick couldn't qualify for it himself. The timing was particularly unfortunate for Rick, since his celebration party was scheduled for that Sunday. By noon, I had systematically dismantled the financial foundation of their lifestyle with the same methodical precision I had once used to save lives in the ER. The difference was that this time, I was saving myself. The first sign that my message had been received came Saturday morning. My phone rang at 7 a.m., Chloe's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to my daughter's tearful, frantic message about mysterious payment problems and Rick's fury. The second call came an hour later, Rick himself, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Eleanor, we need to talk. There's been some kind of banking error, and we need to sort this out immediately." I deleted the message without finishing it. Meanwhile, Rick had begun his own campaign. He called mutual acquaintances, painting me as a vengeful old woman who was punishing his success out of jealousy and spite. He hinted at early dementia, suggested that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, and positioned himself as the concerned family member trying to protect everyone from my erratic behavior. But Rick had underestimated both me and the community we moved in. David Chen had many friends among the social circle that Rick was trying to impress, and David had his own version of events to share. Over lunch at the same restaurant where Chloe had suggested I needed structure, David made sure that certain influential people heard the real story. The tale of a retired physician who had quietly supported her ungrateful family for a decade, only to be called a burden and told she needed to be eliminated from their lives, spread through their social circle like wildfire. The detail about Rick's celebration party being canceled because the country club membership was actually in my name was particularly delicious to people who had always suspected that his lifestyle exceeded his actual income. By Monday morning, Rick was discovering what it felt like to have his comfortable world fall apart. His credit card was declined at lunch with potential business partners. The bank called about the returned mortgage payment and associated fees. Most humiliatingly, a tow truck arrived at his office to repossess the Mercedes, providing entertainment for his entire staff. Tuesday brought more consequences. Chloe encountered Mrs. Hamilton, one of the leading lights of their social circle, at the grocery store. According to David's sources, Mrs. Hamilton had expressed her deepest sympathies about my apparent health issues and wondered if Chloe needed any help managing my affairs. The mortification of having to explain that her mother was perfectly fine and had simply stopped paying for their lifestyle was more than Chloe could handle. She abandoned her shopping cart and fled the store in tears. Wednesday's crisis arrived in the form of an email from Northgate Academy. The school required immediate payment of overdue tuition, or Leo and Maya would not be permitted to return after the holiday break. This was the breaking point for Chloe. Thursday evening, she called again, and this time I answered. "Mom," she said, her voice broken with exhaustion and shame. "Rick wants to meet with you, to talk things through." I agreed, but only on my terms. My house, both of you together, and David would be present as well. They arrived Friday evening, looking like defeated refugees from their former life. Rick had lost the swagger that had once defined him. Chloe looked exhausted and frightened. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching sympathy for them. Rick began with threats, talking about lawsuits for emotional distress and elder abuse. David quietly placed a thick leather portfolio on my coffee table, labeled Family Support Documentation 2015-2025. He opened it to a page showing detailed records of vacation expenses and club fees. Rick's bluster died in his throat. I presented them with what I called a rehabilitation plan, though it was actually a surrender document. They were going to sell the house they couldn't afford and move somewhere appropriate to their actual income. Rick was going to write a public apology, acknowledging my financial support and his ingratitude, to be posted on social media and in the community newsletter. Most importantly, I was establishing a trust fund for Leo and Maya's education and health care, to be managed entirely by David. Rick and Chloe would have no access to these funds, ensuring that my grandchildren's futures would be secure regardless of their parents' financial decisions. Finally, Chloe would need to find employment. Rick would need to learn to live within his means. They had 90 days to demonstrate that they were serious about changing their attitudes and their lives. The alternative was complete financial independence, immediately and permanently. Rick started to argue, but Chloe placed her hand on his arm. "Mom," she said quietly, "we accept your terms." 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden on a beautiful spring morning, reading about Rick's public apology in the community newsletter. It's a masterpiece of humble pie, acknowledging not just my financial support but my contributions as a physician and grandmother. The comment section is filled with expressions of support for me and gentle criticism of how they had treated me. The house sold quickly, and they've moved to a modest colonial in a good school district. Rick's Honda Civic is a far cry from his former Mercedes, but he drives it without complaint. Most surprisingly, Chloe has found work again, starting as a marketing coordinator at a local firm. She's rediscovering skills she thought she had lost and remembering what it felt like to be proud of her own accomplishments. The children have adapted to their new school with the resilience that kids possess. They miss some of the luxuries of their old life, but they seem happier now that the constant tension in their home has dissipated. Rick is learning to be a father instead of just a provider of expensive experiences. Last Sunday, they came for dinner at my house. Not the formal dining room meals of the past, but a casual gathering in my kitchen. Rick and Chloe brought a homemade apple pie that they had baked together. Leo and Maya chattered excitedly about their teachers and friends, treating me like the beloved grandmother I had always been. As we cleared the dishes, Rick paused beside me at the sink. "Thank you, Mom," he said, using that title for the first time in years, "for everything." I looked at this man who had once dismissed my life's work as following orders in chaos, and saw someone different. Someone humbled, certainly, but also more honest, more real. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to build a life based on actual accomplishments, rather than borrowed money and false pretenses. "You're welcome," I replied, and meant it. That night, after they had gone home to their smaller, more honest life, I sat in Arthur's chair and reflected on what I had accomplished. I hadn't just stopped enabling their dysfunction. I had forced them to discover who they really were when the safety net was removed. Rick was finding out that he could be successful without being cruel. Chloe was remembering that she was brilliant and capable in her own right. The children were learning that love doesn't come with a price tag, and that family means more than the size of your house or the badge on your car. As for me, I had learned something equally important. Generosity without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The revenge, they say, is best served cold. I had discovered something better. The most satisfying victory isn't destroying someone who has wronged you. It's creating a situation where they have no choice but to become better people. Rick's promotion had made him a CEO, but my intervention had made him a man worth respecting. Chloe's return to work had reminded her that she was more than just someone's wife and mother. And I had remembered that my worth didn't depend on how much money I could give away or how much inconvenience I was willing to accept. This morning, I received a card from Leo, decorated with crayon drawings of our family. "Grandma Eleanor," he had written in his careful second-grade handwriting, "you are the best grandmother in the whole world, and also the smartest person I know." From the mouth of babes, I thought, and smiled as I added the card to my growing collection of treasures that couldn't be bought with money. The storm that began that Thanksgiving night had cleared the air completely. In its wake, we had all discovered something we had lost along the way. The difference between what we wanted and what we actually needed, between love and obligation, between supporting someone and enabling their worst impulses. The house is quiet now as I finish writing this story. Tomorrow, Chloe and I are having lunch at our old bistro, just the two of us. She wants to tell me about a promotion she's earned through her own hard work, and I want to hear every detail. Rick is coaching Leo's Little League team, something he never had time for when he was too busy spending my money at the country club. Maya is taking art lessons at the community center, proudly showing me pictures she creates with her own imagination, rather than expensive supplies I provided. They have built a life that belongs to them, supported by their own efforts, and sustained by their genuine love for each other. It's smaller than what they had before, but it's real in a way that their previous existence never was. And I have reclaimed something precious that I had almost lost, my own sense of worth. Not as someone's benefactor or enabler, but as Eleanor Vance, physician, mother, grandmother, and woman who knows when to give and when to step back. The most beautiful part of this story isn't the moment Rick lost his Mercedes or when Chloe had to explain their situation to the neighbors. It's watching my family discover that they were strong enough to stand on their own all along. They just needed someone to love them enough to let them fall and then help them learn to fly. That, I've learned, is what real love looks like. Not the bottomless checkbook or the endless tolerance for disrespect, but the courage to hold the people you love accountable for becoming their best selves. The storm is over now. In its place, we have something infinitely more valuable than the artificial paradise I had been financing. We have a family built on mutual respect, genuine achievement, and love that doesn't come with strings attached. And that, I can say with absolute certainty, is priceless.